She found the note at midnight. 3 words. Her father's handwriting, on a fireplace mantel inside a lodge that had been dark and empty for 11 months. The wood was already stacked. The matches were already waiting. He had been dead since January. Outside, the snow kept falling. Her car was in the drive with 2 suitcases she had loaded herself, because no one else had offered. Behind her, somewhere down the mountain, a door had just closed on 6 years of her life. Ahead of her, the lodge sat in the dark like it had been expecting her. She struck the first match. It died. She struck the second. The kindling caught. And in the light of that first small flame, she saw what her father had left behind, not just a fire, not just a note, but a room at the end of the hallway with a key still in the lock and a secret that had been waiting years for her to come home and find it. Anna Whitfield had driven 2 hours in the snow before she let herself cry. Not when she found the messages. Not when Beverly set the suitcases on the porch. Not even when Garrett stood at the bottom of the stairs and said nothing. 2 hours of Colorado mountain road, ice under the tires, nothing outside the windows but dark and white and more dark. And then something cracked open in her chest and she pulled over and sat there with her hands on the wheel and cried until she couldn't anymore. Then she kept driving. The key was in her coat pocket, the one Joseph had pressed into her palm 3 Christmases ago, before the distance between them got too wide to cross easily, before she stopped calling back right away, before she started meaning to visit and then didn't. She hadn't thought about that key in months. Tonight it was the only thing she had that felt like solid ground. The sign came up in the headlights just before midnight. Weathered wood. Hand-painted letters that had faded but not disappeared. Whitfield Ridge Lodge. Est 1961. Snow had gathered along the top edge like the sign was wearing a hat. Anna slowed the car to a stop and sat there looking at it. Her father's name. Her name too, once. Before she became Anna Whitfield by marriage instead of Anna Whitfield by blood. Before she let herself get confused about which one mattered more. She drove the rest of the way up the mountain slowly. The lodge was dark when she parked. Dark in the way old buildings get when no one has been inside them in a long time. That particular heavy dark that has weight to it. She sat in the car for a moment with the engine running and the heater going and told herself she was just catching her breath. She was not catching her breath. She was scared to go inside, which was absurd. It was her father's lodge. She'd spent summers here as a girl. She knew every room, every creaking stair, the way the big stone fireplace in the main hall threw shadows on the ceiling when the fire got going. She knew the smell of cedar and old wood and mountain cold, except she hadn't been here in 6 years, and the man who made it home was 11 months in the ground. Anna turned off the engine. She got out of the car. The snow was coming down soft and steady, not a storm. Just winter doing what winter does. It settled on her shoulders and her hair, and she stood there a moment with her key in her hand, and the dark lodge in front of her and the whole mountain quiet around her. Then she walked to the door and unlocked it. The cold inside was different from the cold outside. Outside the air moved, inside it just sat there, still and close and waiting. Anna stood in the doorway and clicked on her flashlight. The beam swept across the main hall. Sheet-covered furniture, the long wooden front desk, the rack of keys behind it, most of them hanging where they'd always hung. The big mounted elk head above the fireplace that she'd named Gerald when she was 8 years old because it seemed rude not to. Gerald was still there. Everything else was just as still. Anna stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind her. The latch caught with the same sound it always made. A small solid click. She'd heard that sound 10,000 times in her childhood. It settled something in her chest that she hadn't known needed settling. She was inside. She was here. That was enough. For now. She moved the flashlight beam slowly around the room, taking inventory out of habit. Her father's habit, really. You walk into any space, you look at what's there. What needs attention? What's holding and what isn't? Joseph Whitfield had taught her to do that before she could read. She'd turned it into a profession eventually. Spent 12 years as an architect looking at spaces and seeing not what they were but what they could be. Old habit, hard to shake. The whole looked intact, dusty, cold, but the bones were good. Her father had built this place well. The beams above her head were old-growth pine, salvaged and set by hand. The stone fireplace was local granite, laid by a mason from Durango who'd been dead 20 years but whose work hadn't moved an inch. The floors were wide plank oak, worn smooth in the paths where people had walked for 60 years. Good bones. Anna walked toward the fireplace and stopped. There was wood stacked beside it. Not old wood. Not the dusty, forgotten wood that might have been left here years ago. This was cut and split and stacked neatly, the pieces still pale at the cut ends. Recent. Someone had been here recently. Someone had brought in firewood and stacked it beside the fireplace not long ago. Anna's flashlight moved to the mantel. A blue tin. Round, the size of a coffee can with a hinged lid. She knew that tin. It had lived on the mantel of this fireplace since before she was born. Her father kept matches in it. But there was something else. A piece of paper folded once, set on top of the tin. Her name on the outside. Not Anna Whitfield. Not even Anna. Anna Bear. She hadn't heard that name in years. Joseph had called her that from the time she was small, when she was the kind of child who held on hard and didn't let go. She'd grown out of the name and he'd stopped using it, mostly. But his handwriting was unmistakable. She'd know those letters anywhere. The particular way he made his capital A, like he was building it from the ground up. Her hands weren't quite steady when she picked up the note. She unfolded it. 3 lines. Joseph Whitfield had never been a man who used more words than necessary. The wood is dry. Matches in the tin. Don't be stubborn about asking for help. Anna read it twice. Then she stood there holding it and felt something move through her that she couldn't name exactly. Not grief, not comfort. Something in between. Something that hurt and held at the same time. He was gone. 11 months gone. She had stood at his graveside in January with frozen ground under her feet and said goodbye to a man she'd spent a decade meaning to know better, and somehow he was still leaving her notes. She opened the blue tin. The matches were there. She took out 3 and knelt in front of the fireplace and got the fire going the way he'd taught her. Kindling first. Let it catch. Then the smaller pieces. Then the larger logs, once you had something that could hold them. It took 2 tries. But the fire came. Anna sat back on her heels and watched the flames settle into something real. Warmth moved out slowly, the way warmth does in a cold stone room, finding the edges last. She pulled her coat tighter and watched the fire and tried not to think about the last 4 hours. She mostly failed at that. The messages on Garrett's phone had been there a long time. She could see that now. The timestamps went back almost 2 years, though the earlier ones were sparse, careful, like he'd been deleting as he went. What was left was 8 months of a conversation she wasn't part of, a whole thread of Garrett being someone she didn't recognize. Warmer than he'd been with her in a long time. Funnier. Making plans. She'd picked up his phone because hers was charging across the room and she wanted to check the weather before they went to bed. That was all. Just the weather. The irony was not lost on her. Beverly had been there within the hour. That was the part Anna kept circling back to. Garrett had called his mother, and Beverly had come, and Beverly had listened to her son's side of things for 20 minutes upstairs while Anna stood in the kitchen, with her coat still on and her car keys in her hand. And then Beverly had come downstairs with 2 suitcases and set them on the porch. "This is Garrett's house," she said. "The way you might state a fact. The way you'd say the sky is blue. This is Garrett's house. You need to find somewhere else." No shouting. No cruelty in her voice. Just the flat certainty of a woman who had already decided. Anna had looked past her at Garrett. He was standing near the bottom of the stairs. Jacket on. Like he'd been about to go somewhere. Like he was in a hurry to get past this part. She'd said his name. Just his name. 1 word. He'd looked at the floor. That was it. 6 years of marriage. A house they'd picked out together. A life she'd thought was real, and he looked at the floor. Beverly closed the door. Anna stood on the porch in the snow with her 2 suitcases and didn't move for a long time. She was trying to locate some feelings she could use. Anger seemed like the right thing. Anger was useful. Anger had direction. But what she felt was mostly just a deep, bewildered quiet. Like the moment after a very loud sound, when your ears are still ringing and you can't yet tell what's missing. She loaded the suitcases herself. Drove down the street. Sat at a gas station for 20 minutes and thought about who she could call. Her college roommate was in Portland. They talked twice a year. Her work colleagues were colleagues. Her mother had been gone since Anna was 19, and her father had been gone since January. The key was in her coat pocket. She'd driven north and then west and then up the mountain road she hadn't been on in 6 years, and she hadn't let herself think too hard about what she was doing. because if she thought about it, she might talk herself out of it. She just drove. And the mountain came up around her, dark and quiet and absolutely indifferent to her problems, which was actually a comfort. The fire in the fireplace was properly going now. The room was warmer. Not warm yet, but working on it. Anna looked around the hall. She should find a blanket. She should get the thermostat working if there was heat in this place still. She should figure out where she was sleeping tonight. She should do a lot of practical things. Instead, she picked up her flashlight and walked toward the back hallway. Not because she heard anything. Just because her father had left her dry wood and matches, and a note in his handwriting, and she wanted to understand why. She wanted to find the part of this that made sense. She was halfway down the back hall when the light under the door stopped her. Room 12. A thin line of yellow light at the bottom of the door. Anna stood very still. Someone was in room 12. She thought about this for a moment, longer than she probably should have. There were several reasonable explanations. A timer on a lamp, a phone charger someone left behind. Her own eyes adjusting to the dark and making things up. Except the light was steady and warm, and she could see it shifting slightly, the way light shifts when a lamp is in a room with a fire going. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. A sound. Someone moving. The slow, careful movement of an older person getting up from a chair. The door opened. He was tall and had been taller once. Broad through the shoulders the way men who've worked with their hands all their lives get broad. White hair, gone a little long. A beard that needed attending to. He was wearing flannel and work boots and looking at her with the particular expression of a man who is not surprised but is still taking a moment to let the reality of a thing settle. Earl Sutton. She knew him. She'd known him all her life. He'd been her father's closest friend for 30 years. The kind of friend you don't see very often but trust completely. He'd been at the funeral in January, standing at the back, not talking to anyone, holding his hat in both hands the way men of a certain generation hold their hats at funerals. He said her name the way her father had said it, with the emphasis on the first syllable. Anna. Like it was two things. She said his. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Earl stepped back and opened the door wider, and she understood she was meant to come in. The room was small and warm. A lamp on the nightstand, old and gold-toned. A wood stove in the corner with a fire going inside it. A rocking chair near the window that she recognized from the main hall, moved in here at some point. The bed was made. His jacket was on the hook behind the door. A thermos and a paper bag on the small table by the window. Earl had been living here. Not visiting. Living. He sat back down in the rocking chair like this was a conversation they'd scheduled. She stood in the doorway. He said, "Joe told me you'd come." She said, "He died 11 months ago. Told me before that." She looked at him. "He called me in October," Earl said. "About 3 months before he passed. Said he wanted me to keep an eye on the place. Keep the firewood stocked. Keep the heat going in the pipes through winter so nothing froze up." He paused. "Said you'd need it to be ready when you came." He couldn't have known I'd come. Earl looked at her with the patience of a man who has learned that some things don't require an argument. "No," he said. He couldn't have known for certain. But he knew you, and he thought it was likely. Anna didn't answer that, because answering it meant sitting with what it meant, and she wasn't ready for that yet. She asked if there was another room that was habitable, and he told her the second and fourth rooms on the upper hall had beds made up and blankets in the closets. She thanked him. He nodded. She left. She took the room at the end of the upper hall. Second door from the right. It was cold enough that she could see her breath, but there was a small electric radiator in the corner and it worked when she turned it on. She found 2 heavy wool blankets in the closet and a third folded on the chair. She didn't bother changing. Just pulled off her boots and got under the blankets, with her coat still on, and lay there looking at the ceiling. The ceiling of this room had a water stain in one corner that she remembered from childhood. A shape her father had told her looked like a bear, which was generous, but he'd said it so many times she'd eventually started seeing it that way. The bear was still there, still the same shape it had always been. She stared at it for a long time. She thought about Garrett. She tried to locate the anger again and found it was there but muted, behind something else. Sadness maybe, or something more complicated than sadness. The feeling you get when something ends and you realize you'd already been grieving it for a while without knowing why. She thought about Beverly's voice, the flatness of it. "This is Garrett's house." She'd said it the way you close a book. Final. already done. She thought about her father. She thought about the note on the mantel, his handwriting, the blue tin in exactly the right place. Earl Sutton in room 12, waiting because Joseph Whitfield had asked him to wait. The radiator ticked quietly as it warmed the room. She slept. When she woke, the light coming through the curtains was gray and thin, and the mountain outside was very white and very still. She lay there for a moment, listening to the quiet. Real quiet. The kind you only get in the mountains in winter, when snow has muffled everything down to nothing, and the world holds its breath. She hadn't slept like that in months. She got up, washed her face in water that was cold but not icy, went downstairs. Earl was already in the kitchen, coffee going, a cast-iron pan on the stove. He didn't look up when she came in, but he moved a mug to the edge of the counter where she could reach it easily, and that was enough. She poured the coffee and stood at the window looking out at the mountain. Snow on the pines, the sky going from gray to pale blue, a hawk very high up circling something. She said, "Did he tell you why he thought I'd come?" Earl cracked 2 eggs into the pan. He said sometimes people need a place to go before they know they need it. Said he wanted to make sure you had one. That's not a reason. No, Earl said. It's not. She waited. He said, he was your father. He worried about you, didn't always know how to say it. He moved the eggs in the pan. Isn't complicated. She wanted to argue with that. She'd spent a fair amount of time in the past few years being frustrated with how uncomplicated people made Joseph Whitfield sound, when her experience of him had been considerably more complicated. He was a man who sent birthday cards that were always 2 weeks late, who called on holidays and then ran out of things to say after 10 minutes, who had been, in the years after her mother died, quietly but thoroughly unreachable in the ways that mattered most. He had loved her. She'd never doubted that. He just hadn't always known what to do about it. She drank her coffee. Earl put eggs on a plate and set it on the table, and she sat down and ate them. After breakfast, she went to find the box. She'd known it would be somewhere. Had known since she walked in and found the firewood stacked and the note on the mantel. Joseph Whitfield didn't do things part way. If he'd arranged for the lodge to be ready, if he'd left a note, then there would be more. He would have left more. She started in the main hall, checked the desk behind the front counter. The drawer had some old registration papers and a broken pen and a deck of cards with the 2 of clubs missing. She checked the cabinet beneath the elk mount. Old guest logbooks going back to the 1970s, rubber-banded in groups by decade. She left those. She moved through the ground floor methodically. The sitting room off the main hall. The small library with its 2 walls of books, most of them her father's, all of them read. The storage closet off the kitchen, still neat, organized the way Joseph organized everything. By logic she could follow because she'd inherited the same logic. She found it in the library. Bottom shelf. Far left. A wooden box the size of a shoebox, the wood worn smooth from handling. Her name carved into the top, not Anna Whitfield, Anna Bear. She sat down right there on the library floor, which was cold and dusty, and held the box in her lap. She sat like that for a while before she opened it. The photographs were on top. She'd expected that. What she hadn't expected was how many there were. Dozens. Organized, which was very him, into a rough chronology. Anna at what looked like 5 or 6, gap-toothed, standing on the front porch of this lodge with her arms out like she was about to fly somewhere. Anna and Joseph at the lake behind the property, her with a fish she'd caught, both of them sunburned and happy. Anna at 12, sitting on the roof of the equipment shed reading a book, which she absolutely was not supposed to be doing, and her father had apparently taken the photograph anyway instead of telling her to get down. She hadn't known he'd taken that one. She turned it over. On the back, in pencil, 12 years old and already argues like a lawyer. Proud of her anyway, she set it down carefully. There were letters. 12 of them, she counted, all in envelopes she recognized as the kind her father bought in bulk at the hardware store in town. Each one addressed to her. None of them ever mailed. Happy birthday, Anna Bear. I almost drove down to Denver last week. Then I talked myself out of it because I figured you had your own life and didn't need me showing up unannounced. I know that was probably the wrong call. I'm working on being less stubborn about that. She read 4 letters before she had to stop. Not because they were devastating. Because they weren't. They were just her father, trying to reach her from the wrong side of a distance he didn't know how to close. Showing up on paper because he didn't know how to show up in person. She recognized the thing underneath the words. She recognized it because she had the same problem. She had spent years meaning to call back right away, meaning to visit, meaning to tell him things she kept deciding could wait until next time. There was always going to be a next time, until there wasn't. She set the letters aside. Under the letters was a ledger, small, cloth-bound, different from the official guest logbook she'd found in the cabinet. She opened it. Her father's handwriting. The same hand as the note on the mantel, but older, more deliberate, like he'd meant every word to stay. Things I did right. Things I did wrong. I'm starting with the right ones because the wrong ones are harder to finish. The first entry was dated 15 years ago and was about a woman who'd come to the lodge in February with a broken collarbone and a story that didn't add up. He'd given her room 12. He'd driven her to the clinic in town himself and sat in the waiting room for 4 hours. He'd never asked her what happened. She'd stayed 2 weeks and left before dawn one morning and left the key on the nightstand and a note that said only, "Thank you. I'm going to be all right." He'd kept the note. Anna sat on the library floor with the ledger open and read. She read about a man who'd lost his job and showed up in December with $20 and shame written all over him. And Joseph had charged him $1 a night because that was enough to let the man keep his dignity. She read about the family whose car broke down on the mountain road during a blizzard and spent a week at the lodge while the roads cleared. She read about the woman who arrived drunk and angry, and Joseph had given her coffee and dry toast and let her shout until she ran out of shouting, and then she'd cried for 2 hours at the kitchen table and he'd just sat there, not talking, just there. She read about a carpenter named Earl Sutton who'd shown up 12 years ago in rough shape, and Joseph had told him to go sleep it off and come back when he was ready to act right, and Earl had come back 2 days later, and Joseph had never mentioned the first night again. Some of the entries were practical. Furnace broke, fixed by Friday. Roof over west wing needs attention by spring. Some were brief notes about guests she'd never know. Some were longer, more careful, like her father had been trying to work something out by writing it down. She was about a third of the way through the ledger when she found the entry dated 10 months ago, 3 months before Joseph died. She almost missed what it was. It looked like all the others at first. A guest, a date, an observation. But the name wasn't a guest's name, Garrett. She read it twice, then a third time. The date was March of the previous year, 8 months before Anna found the messages on his phone. Joseph had written the date, a location, a restaurant in Denver, one she and Garrett had been to. She recognized the name and a note. Saw something I wish I hadn't. Pretty certain Anna doesn't know. Spent the drive home trying to figure out what the right thing is. Didn't arrive at an answer. Below that, the next entry was dated 2 weeks later. Still trying to figure it out. Called her. We talked about nothing important. The way we do. I almost said something. Then she laughed at something I said and she sounded happy and I lost my nerve. Anna closed the ledger. She sat there on the cold library floor and held it in both hands and breathed. Her father had known. March. He'd known since March of last year. 8 months before she found out. And he had sat on that knowledge and weighed it and called her and lost his nerve. And then he had written it down in his private ledger and carried it with him until October, when he called Earl Sutton and asked him to keep the lodge ready, and then until January when he died. He hadn't told her. She waited for the anger. It seemed like the thing that should come. It came, but it was small. Smaller than she expected. Because underneath the anger was something she recognized now that she was looking at it. Her father had watched her laugh on the phone and decided she sounded happy, and he hadn't wanted to be the one to take that away from her. He'd made the wrong call. But she knew the feeling behind it. She knew exactly the shape of that particular cowardice, because she had her own version of it. All the things she'd decided to wait and say later. All the calls she'd meant to return. They were more alike than she'd ever wanted to admit. She opened the ledger again. Read to the end. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before he died. I have a plan for the lodge. Earl will keep things ready. Sylvie will look in on things when she can. The paperwork is in order. If Anna comes, she'll find what she needs. If she doesn't, she'll find it eventually, in her own time, the way she always does things. Then, a line below that, set apart like he'd gone back and added it later. There is one thing more, bottom of the box. The small envelope. She should open it when she's ready. Anna looked down at the box. She hadn't emptied it completely. She lifted the remaining letters out. Under them, at the very bottom of the box, was a small envelope, Smaller than the others, plain white. Not her name on the outside. Not her name. 2 words written in her father's hand, for the one coming with you. Anna stopped breathing for a moment. Then she breathed again. Slowly. In through her nose, out through her mouth. The way you breathe when something lands too hard, too fast, and you need your body to keep going while your mind catches up. She was 8 months along. She'd known since June. She hadn't told Garrett until July, and his response had been careful and pleasant, and had not quite managed to be happy in the way she'd hoped, and she'd filed that away in the drawer of things she didn't want to look at directly. She hadn't told her father. She'd meant to. She'd been working up to it. She'd thought about it on the phone that last time, in December, when he'd called to check in and they'd talked about the weather and the holidays and nothing important, the way they did. She'd opened her mouth twice and both times the words hadn't come. He'd died 3 weeks later. She'd spent the months since carrying the weight of that silence, the thing she'd never gotten to tell him, and he had known. She didn't open the small envelope, not yet. Not today. She set it back in the box and closed the lid, and sat with her hands on top of it, and the library quiet around her, and the mountain outside, holding all its snow and all its cold and all its complete indifference. She understood something sitting there. Something she didn't have the words for exactly, but felt in the particular way you feel things that are true before you can say why. Joseph Whitfield had not been good at being present. He'd been better at being prepared. He hadn't known how to bridge the distance while he was alive, but he had spent the last months of his life trying to make sure she'd find what she needed after. It wasn't the same as being there, but it was what he had, and he had given all of it. Outside a sound, an engine, then tires on gravel. A car had come up the mountain road. Anna stood, carried the box to the front desk and set it down, went to the window. A station wagon, an older one. Green or gray, it was hard to tell under the snow. A woman getting out of it, moving with the careful ease of someone who knows exactly where she's going and doesn't need to rush. She was carrying a basket in one arm and a thermos in the other. 60s maybe. Wide through the hips. Silver hair cut short under a green wool hat. She looked up at the lodge, then she looked directly at the window where Anna was standing, and smiled. Not surprised, not tentative. Like she'd been expecting to see Anna there. Like this was simply the appointed time. Anna went to the front door and opened it. Cold air came in. The woman climbed the porch steps and stopped at the top and looked at Anna the way people look at you when they've heard about you for years, but are only now seeing you in person. "You're Joseph's girl," she said. "I am," Anna said. "Sylvie Calloway." She held up the basket. "I brought breakfast." "Well, second breakfast, I suppose, if Earl's been doing his job." She paused. "He has been doing his job, hasn't he?" "There were eggs," Anna said. "Good." Sylvie moved past her into the hall with the ease of someone who'd been in this building many times. She stopped in the middle of the room and looked around. Took it in. Something crossed her face. Something too quick and complicated to read. Then she carried the basket toward the kitchen. "Come on," she said over her shoulder. "I'll put the coffee on properly. Earl makes it too strong. Always has." Anna stood at the open door a moment longer. The cold morning. The white mountain, the hawk still circling somewhere overhead. Then she closed the door and followed. Sylvie Calloway made coffee the way some people make arguments, deliberately, with conviction. Like she'd thought about it beforehand and arrived at a position she wasn't going to budge from. She filled the percolator from the tap, measured the grounds without looking at the canister, set it on the burner, and turned around with the expression of a woman who had more to say but was going to let the coffee happen first. Anna sat at the kitchen table and watched her. She'd been watching people move through this kitchen her whole life. Her father, mostly. Joseph Whitfield in the kitchen was a different man than Joseph Whitfield anywhere else. Quieter. More purposeful. He'd made breakfast for guests every morning the lodge was open. Not because it was required. Not because anyone expected it. But because he thought it was the right way to start a day. Hot food. A table. Somewhere to sit before the world asked anything of you. Sylvie moved through the kitchen the same way. Like she'd been here before. Like she knew where things were. "How long did you know him?" Anna asked. Sylvie didn't turn around. "Joseph? Going on 22 years. I didn't know that." "No," Sylvie said. "He wasn't much for introducing people to each other." She pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet above the sink. The right cabinet. Without hesitating. Kept his lives a little separate. Not from secrecy, just from habit, I suppose. The habit of a man who spent a lot of time alone. Anna looked at her hands on the table. He talked about you, though, Sylvie said. More than you'd think. What did he say? Sylvie poured the coffee and set a mug in front of Anna and sat down across from her. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. Looked at Anna directly, the way older women sometimes do when they've run out of patience for talking around things. He said you were the best thing he ever built, and that he'd been a better builder than father. She paused. His words. Anna didn't answer. Outside the kitchen window, the mountain was fully light now, white and enormous and very calm. A blue jay landed on the windowsill and looked in and left. He called me, Sylvie said. 3 days before he passed. Anna looked up. I didn't know it was 3 days before. I didn't know anything was wrong. Not exactly. He'd been quieter than usual. But Joseph was always quiet. She turned the mug in her hands. He said he needed to ask me something. He said he thought Anna might be coming up to the lodge at some point. He didn't know when. Could be soon, could be a while. But he wanted to make sure someone looked in. Made sure she wasn't alone too long. He said that. He said it like it was a practical matter. Like he was asking me to water a plant. Sylvie's mouth curved slightly. That was Joseph. Everything urgent got said in the most ordinary voice he had. Anna thought about the ledger. The entry in March. Saw something I wish I hadn't. The way he'd written it down, like he was making a note about the furnace. Like even in private, even in the one place he let himself be honest, he couldn't quite bring himself to say the thing directly. He died 3 weeks later, Sylvie said, and I kept waiting. Figured if you were coming, you'd come when you were ready. She looked around the kitchen. 12 months is a long time to wait. 11, Anna said. 11, Sylvie agreed. Silence, but not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that happens between people who are both holding the same weight from different sides. Anna said, how did you meet him? Originally. Sylvie was quiet for a moment. Then she set down her mug. I came to the lodge, she said. 17 years ago. Not as a guest. I mean, I was a guest, technically. But not the kind who's on vacation. She looked at the table. My husband had left, took most of what we had and left. I had the car, a little money, and absolutely no idea what to do next. She paused. I drove up the mountain because I'd seen the sign on the highway 100 times, and I always thought it looked like a place where things might be simpler. Anna waited. Joseph gave me room 12, Sylvie said. He didn't ask me anything. Didn't want to know my story. Just handed me the key and told me breakfast was at 7, and if I needed anything, the kitchen was always open. She picked up the mug again. I stayed 3 weeks. By the time I left, I'd figured out I wanted to open a diner in town. Which I did. Which I've had for 15 years now. She looked at Anna. Your father came in every Tuesday morning for eggs and bad coffee for 15 years. He never let me give them to him for free. He wouldn't, Anna said. No. He absolutely would not. Something eased a little in Anna's chest. She didn't have a name for what it was. Just a small giving way, like a knot that's been held too long finally starting to loosen. They talked for another hour. Sylvie told her things about Joseph she didn't know. Not big things. Small things. That he'd taught himself to play guitar late in life and was genuinely terrible at it, and knew it, and kept playing anyway. That he'd had a standing argument with the hardware store owner in town about the correct way to seal a window in high altitude, and both men had been absolutely certain they were right for going on a decade. That he'd read 3 books a week and kept them organized not by author or title, but by what he'd thought of them, which meant his shelves made no sense to anyone but him. She knew the shelves. She'd grown up near those shelves. She'd never asked him his system. After Sylvie left, around mid-morning, Anna stood in the main hall and looked at the guest logbooks she'd found the day before. She hadn't opened them. She did now. She took the bundle from the 2000s, pulled off the rubber band, and opened the first one. Official records. Guest name. Dates. Room numbers, payment. The handwriting in these was more formal than the private ledger, more careful. Her father at his administrative best. But then, besides certain entries always in room 12, she found the small notation she'd missed the first time because she hadn't been looking for it. RM. Over and over. Tucked beside a name, a date. Sometimes a brief note in the margin. Mother, traveling alone. Roads still bad. Couple car trouble on 285. Let them have the back kitchen in the evenings, RM. She counted them in just the first logbook. 23 times in 2 years. 23 people in room 12. She went back to the library and found the older books. The 90s. Earlier. The notation was there going back to 1989, always room 12. Always RM. She didn't know what it stood for. Not yet. But she knew it was something. Her father didn't use abbreviations casually. He was precise. If he wrote RM, it meant something specific, and it meant the same thing every time. She was still sitting with the logbooks when Earl came in from outside stamping snow off his boots. She asked him what RM meant. He stopped stamping and looked at her. "He tell you about room 12? Earl said. He wrote about it. In the ledger. Earl hung his jacket on the hook by the kitchen door, moved to the stove and put the kettle on. His back was to her. She waited. "Mercy room," he said. She didn't understand at first. Then she did. "He never charged anyone who stayed in room 12, Earl said. Hadn't from the beginning, far as I could tell. Started before I knew him. He turned around. Someone showed up without enough, without anything. He'd put them in room 12. No charge, no timeline. Stay until you can figure out what's next." He paused. "RM room Mercy." Anna looked at the logbook open on the table in front of her. "Just in 2 years. Just in one book. How many people?" she said. "Over the years?" Earl shook his head. "Joseph didn't keep a separate count. I don't think he wanted to. He thought keeping count made it into something different than what it was supposed to be." "What was it supposed to be?" Earl looked at her steadily. "Just a room," he said. "Just a door that stayed open." She thought about Beverly setting the suitcases on the porch. The particular sound of a door closing. The way cold air feels when it comes in from behind. She thought about driving up the mountain and finding the fire already lit. She didn't say any of that. She just sat with the logbook and let it settle. Ray Dobbins arrived that afternoon. She heard him before she saw him. A truck with a loud engine, the kind that announces itself a quarter-mile away. It parked outside and she heard the door slam, and then boots on the porch steps. And then Earl opened the front door and said something too low to hear. And then Ray Dobbins came into the main hall. He was her father's age. Maybe a year or two older. Lean through the face in the way of men who've spent their lives outside. Gray at the temples, work gloves folded and tucked in his jacket pocket, a toolbox in his right hand. He shook Anna's hand when Earl introduced them. Firm. Brief. "Earl said you were here," he said. "Not warm, not cold. Just a statement. I am," Anna said. "Figured I'd come check the electrical," he said. "Some of the outlets on the upper floor have been giving trouble." Joseph knew. Kept saying he'd get to it. "I don't need you to." "I know you don't need me to," he said. "I'm doing it." He went upstairs. Without waiting for her to say anything else. She looked at Earl. Earl shrugged one shoulder. The shrug of a man who's long since stopped trying to explain certain other men. Ray worked upstairs for the better part of 3 hours. She heard him moving around. The occasional sound of the toolbox opening and closing. He didn't come down for coffee. He didn't come down for anything. Just worked steadily. Until he came down the stairs at 4 in the afternoon and said the 3 outlets on the upper hall were done and the one in room 8 needed a new fixture, but he'd have to get the part from town. He was already putting his gloves on. She said, "Thank you." He said Joseph would have done the same. He walked out. She stood there and tried to parse what exactly had just happened. Not unfriendly, not friendly either. Something careful. Something that looked like obligation but moved like guilt. She couldn't tell yet. Over the next 2 days, more people came. A retired couple from the valley, the Holloways, who showed up with lumber strapped to the roof of their truck and wanted to know where the soft spots were on the back deck. A woman from town named Dottie with a van full of cleaning supplies and a very businesslike manner. 2 brothers, the Kesslers, who were plumbers by trade and who spent an entire afternoon in the basement making noises that suggested the pipes had opinions. Anna watched all of it with the same strange feeling she'd had since she arrived. Like she'd walked into a story that was already in progress. Like everyone had been given their part except her, and they were all waiting politely for her to catch up. She said this to Sylvie on the 3rd day. Sylvie handed her a broom. "Stop watching and start sweeping." So she did. She swept the upper hall. She wiped down the baseboards. She found the linen closet full of sheets that needed washing and started 3 loads in the old washer in the utility room and hung them on the lines in the back because the dryer was broken and someone had to get parts. She looked that the back stairs were fine, but the 3rd step from the bottom on the main staircase needed to be replaced and Earl was already on it. She learned that the kitchen's second burner had a short, and the Kesslers thought it was electrical, and Ray thought it was the burner itself, and they were engaged in a low-level dispute about this, that apparently did not require her input. She learned how a lodge full of people who knew each other operated, the specific rhythms of it, who made decisions and who questioned them, who worked quietly and who needed to explain what they were doing as they did it. She already knew how to work alongside people. 12 years of construction projects had given her that, but this was different from a job site. Everyone here was here because of Joseph. They were doing this because of him, and she was the person he'd left behind, which meant she was also, in some way, the reason. She wasn't sure yet what to do with that. On the fourth day, Preston Cole came. She didn't know who he was when she opened the front door. She just saw a man in an expensive coat, late 50s. The kind of face that knew how to be pleasant and chose when to deploy it. He had a briefcase and a younger man with him she assumed was a lawyer because of the way he held the briefcase. "Ms. Whitfield," he said. Like he'd been expecting her. "Preston Cole, I think we should talk." He said it the way men like him said everything. Like it wasn't a suggestion. She let him in because Earl was in the basement, and Sylvie had gone back to the diner for the afternoon, and she was by herself, and it seemed like the kind of conversation she needed to have without other people in the room. They sat in the main hall. He didn't look at Gerald the elk. He looked at her. He told her he'd been interested in this property for some time, that he was prepared to make a serious offer, that the offer was, in his words, more than fair given the carrying costs and the deferred maintenance. He quoted a number. It was a large number. Anna had spent 4 days in this lodge, and she knew the roof needed attention, and the dryer was broken, and one of the upstairs windows didn't seal right, and the second burner was in dispute, and the back deck had soft spots, and a dozen other things that would cost money she didn't currently have. She knew her savings. She knew the situation she was in. She had a life in Denver that was currently in pieces. She had a house she wasn't in that wasn't really hers. She had debt and practical reality and a baby coming and absolutely no plan. The number Preston Cole put on the table was enough. Enough to pay what was owed. Enough to start over somewhere. Enough to stop worrying about the roof. She looked at the logbook stacked on the front desk. 23 entries, just 2 years. Just one book. "I'll need some time," she said. "Of course," he said, smoothly. "Take a few days." He set a card on the table. "My number. 72 hours is the window I can hold this at, and then the number changes. That's not a pressure tactic, Ms. Whitfield. That's just business." He left. The younger man with the briefcase hadn't spoken once. Anna sat in the main hall for a long time after they left. She held the business card between 2 fingers and looked at the fireplace and tried to think clearly. Tried to be practical. Tried to be the woman who made good decisions based on real information. She was 8 months along. She was alone. The lodge needed money she didn't have. Joseph had left her a building and a community and a room with a door that stayed open. And all of those things were beautiful, and none of them were a plan. She was still sitting there when she heard a car. She knew the engine. She would know that engine anywhere. She stood up, walked to the window, stood to the side of it the way you do when you don't want to be seen looking. The car was a black Audi, Garrett's, the one he'd had for 3 years. The one she'd ridden in 1,000 times. He got out slowly. He was wearing the jacket she'd given him last Christmas. Dark green, good wool. He stood by the car and looked up at the lodge, and she could see even from here that he'd prepared his face for this. The particular arrangement of features that meant he wanted to seem open and contrite without committing to anything specific. She'd seen that face before. She watched him reach back into the car. He came out with flowers, which told her everything she needed to know and also made her furious in a way that was almost useful. She went to the front door and opened it. He looked up, surprised, which meant he'd been planning on knocking, which meant he had a speech. She let him come up the porch steps. He held out the flowers. "I know this isn't—" "Come inside," she said, "because cold." He came in. He looked around the main hall the way people who've never been here do, taking in the elk and the stone fireplace and the general sense of a place that has been many things over a long time. He set the flowers on the front desk. She didn't touch them. He said, "Anna, you drove 4 hours. I needed to see you." Or, she said, "You needed to say something and you thought in person would work better than on the phone." He paused. "Start with whatever you actually came to say," she said. He sighed, which was Garrett preparing to be reasonable. You can't stay up here. You're 8 months pregnant. This place needs a fortune in work. I talked to someone about the property and— Who? Anna said. He stopped. Who did you talk to about the property? A small shift in his face. Almost invisible. But she knew his face. A colleague mentioned that there's interest in mountain real estate right now. I just thought you should know what your options are. A colleague. Someone I know through work. Preston Cole, she said. His jaw moved. Not quite a flinch. He reached out. Yes. He has a client who— He was here 4 hours ago, Anna said. Garrett stopped talking. He was here with a number and a 72-hour window, she said. And now you're here with flowers and a speech about my options. She looked at him, not angry, which surprised her. She'd expected anger, and what she had instead was something cooler and more final. So what was the arrangement? You convinced me to sign, and then what? It's not like that. What is it like? He didn't answer, and the not answering was the answer. She walked to the front desk. She picked up the flowers. She held them out to him. He didn't take them. Garrett, she said quietly, take the flowers and go. Anna, I'm not doing this in your voice, she said. I'm not having this fight on your terms and in your timeline. She set the flowers on the counter between them. You had 8 months of a different conversation I wasn't part of. You don't get to set the terms of this one. He stood there. He was very still in the way Garrett got still when he didn't know what move to make. She walked to the front door and opened it. Cold air came in. The roads will be fine if you leave in the next hour, she said. After that, the overnight temperature drops. He looked at her for a long moment, trying to find the version of her that he knew how to work with. The one who held the door, who made it easier. She looked back at him and didn't help. He picked up his jacket, walked to the door, stopped. I did love you, he said. Like it was a defense. I know, she said. That was the confusing part. He went down the porch steps, got in the car. She watched through the window until the taillights disappeared down the mountain road. Then she picked up Preston Cole's business card from where she'd set it on the front desk. She held it between 2 fingers the way she'd held it before. She was still standing there when Earl came up from the basement. He took one look at her and the empty room and the flowers on the counter and said nothing. She said, he was working with Cole. Earl said, I figured he didn't drive 4 hours for no reason. Earl, I need you to tell me how bad the roof actually is. He blinked. Now? Now, she said. So he told her. All of it. The roof and the back deck and the boiler that was getting to the end of its useful life and the window that wouldn't seal and everything else he'd been cataloging in his head since before she arrived. He told her straight, the way her father always told things straight, without softening and without expanding. Just the facts in the order they mattered. She listened. She asked questions. He answered them. Then she went to the kitchen table and sat down and took out the legal pad she'd found in the supply cabinet and wrote down everything he'd said. Item by item. Rough cost. Priority order. The way she used to plan out a project in the early stages when there's more uncertainty than information, but you start mapping it anyway because the mapping is the first real step. Earl sat across from her. He didn't offer to help. He just sat there in case she needed him to, which was different. At some point, Sylvie came back. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the legal pad and looked at Anna's face and went to the stove and started soup without being asked. Ray Dobbin's truck came up the road just before dark. He'd been to town for the part for room 8. He knocked, came in, went upstairs without a word, and 30 minutes later came back down and said the outlet was done, and he needed to talk to her about the second floor breaker panel at some point. Add it to the list, she said, and handed him the legal pad. He read it, nodded, added 3 items in his own handwriting, handed it back. She looked at what he'd written. Fair assessments. Accurate. She knew enough about buildings to know that. She said, "Why are you doing this?" He was already putting his jacket on. He stopped. He said, "Your father." Then he stopped again, like he'd started the sentence without knowing how to finish it. "What about him?" Ray looked at the jacket in his hands. He didn't put it on. Just held it. A man with something on him, something he's been carrying a while, and you can see the shape of it without seeing what it is. "Sometime," he said. "Not tonight. But sometime I need to tell you something about Joseph." "Okay," she said. He put the jacket on. "It's not a bad thing," he said. Like she'd been worried. Which she hadn't. "It's just something I should have said to him and didn't, and now you're the one who should hear it." He went out. She heard his truck back down the drive and disappear. The kitchen was warm. Sylvie's soup was almost ready. Earl had gotten the fire going again in the main hall. Anna sat at the table with her legal pad and her list of things that needed doing and thought about a man who'd left dry wood and a lit match and an old friend in the room with the best view and a box of letters he'd never sent and one very small envelope for someone he'd never met. She thought about room 12. 23 entries in 2 years. Just in one book. She thought about Preston Cole's number and the 72-hour window and the entirely reasonable case for being sensible about this. She picked up the business card. She tore it in half, then in half again, set the pieces on the table. She'd figure out the money. She'd figure out all of it. One item at a time, the way her father had taught her without ever sitting her down to teach her. You walk into any space, you look at what's there, what's holding and what isn't. Then you start with the most important thing and you work from there. The most important thing was the room at the end of the hall. The door that stayed open. That wasn't going anywhere. She picked up her pencil and turned to a new page on the legal pad. At the top she wrote, "What stays?" And then she wrote room 12. And then she kept writing. The 72 hours came and went. Preston Cole's office called once on the second day, an assistant with a pleasant voice and careful phrasing. Anna said she needed more time. The assistant said she understood and that the offer would need to be revisited. Anna said that was fine. She hung up and stood at the front desk and waited to feel scared. Mostly she felt tired and clear. The way you feel after you've made a decision that cost you something and you know it was right anyway. Earl was on the back deck replacing boards. She could hear him out there. The steady sound of a hammer doing what hammers do, which was the most reassuring sound she'd heard in a week. She went back to the ledger. She'd been reading it in pieces. An hour here, an hour there. It wasn't the kind of thing you could read straight through. Joseph had written it over years, and the voice in it changed as the years went on. Earlier entries were more clipped practical. A woman came in bad shape, room 12. Left Mondays. Later entries were longer, more willing to sit with things. More willing to say what he actually thought. She was near the end of the second to last section now. She turned the page. The entry was dated 18 months before he died. Not about a guest. Not about a repair. Not about the lodge at all. She read the first line and her hands went very still. He knows, or he suspects. Either way, he's not telling her and she's not asking, and I don't know what that is between them, but I know it's not good. She read it again. Then she read the rest. It was Garrett. The entry was about Garrett. Joseph had been in Denver for what he described as a medical appointment. 3 words, no elaboration, which was so like him she almost laughed and then didn't. He'd seen Garrett at a restaurant on his way back through. With a woman he didn't know, and the way they were sitting told him everything he needed to know. He'd written, "I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, trying to figure out what the right thing was. I know what the right thing is. I'm just not sure I'm the right person to do it." Then, a week later, called Anna. We talked for 40 minutes. She asked me how I was feeling. I said fine. I am not fine. But I didn't know how to say the rest without saying all of it, and I wasn't sure all of it was mine to say. Then, a month later, still haven't said anything. I keep thinking about her mother. How when Margaret was sick I tried to handle everything myself because I thought that was what strength looked like. And I was wrong. I was so wrong that I spent 15 years afterward trying to figure out how to apologize for it. I don't want to make the same mistake with Anna. But I also don't know how to make a different one. Anna stopped reading. She sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open and her hands flat on either side of it and stared at the words. Her father had known, not for 8 months, for 18 months, and he had sat with it alone. In this lodge. Writing it down in a private book he kept on the bottom shelf of the library, where she would only find it if she came here, if she needed to come here, if things got bad enough that the key in her coat pocket felt like the only solid thing she had. She'd spent the last several days being angry in a low, contained way about the 8 months she'd thought it was. But 18 months. 18 months was different. 18 months was her father watching her come and go, watching her talk about Garrett on the phone with that particular careful warmth she used when she was trying to make something sound more stable than it was, watching her not ask the question she needed to ask, and he had watched back, and written it down, and not said it, because of Margaret, because of her mother, because the one time he'd tried to handle everything alone it had cost him 15 years of distance from the daughter he loved more than he knew how to say. Anna understood it. That was the part she hadn't expected. She understood exactly the shape of his failure because she recognized it. She had the same one. The same habit of deciding that the right moment hadn't arrived yet. The same instinct to protect by not saying, to love by not burdening, to be strong in exactly the way that looked like absence. She and Joseph Whitfield were, in this particular and significant way, the same, which was terrible and clarifying, both at once. She stayed at the table for a long time. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand, because at some point she had started crying without noticing, and she got up and went to find Earl. He was still on the back deck. He looked up when she came out. She said he knew about Garrett for 18 months. Earl lowered the hammer. He didn't look surprised, but he looked like a man who'd been holding something and was waiting to see what she wanted to do with it. "Did you know?" she asked. "No," he said. "Not specifically." He set the hammer down on the railing. "But I knew he was worried about you. More than usual. He never said anything." "No," Earl said. "He wouldn't have." She looked out at the mountain. Snow on everything. The sky the particular gray of a day that couldn't decide whether to clear or not. "He was scared," she said. "He thought if he told me I'd fall apart and have to handle it alone, and he'd have done to me what he did to himself after my mother." Earl was quiet for a moment. "That sounds right," he said. "It's the wrong call." "Yes," he said, "it is. He made the wrong call, Anna." Earl said it the way her father said it, 2 syllables, first one higher. He was a good man who was scared. Good men make wrong calls when they're scared. Same as everyone else. She did know that. It didn't make it easier to hold, but she knew it. "You all right?" Earl said. "No," she said honestly. "Okay," he said. "You want to be alone or you want me to keep working?" "Keep working," she said. So he did. And she stood on the back deck in the cold and listened to him, and looked at the mountain, and let the thing move through her at whatever pace it needed. She didn't go back inside for a while. When she did, Ray Dobbins was in the kitchen. He'd let himself in, which she'd come to understand was just how he operated. He had a mug of coffee. He was sitting at the table. He wasn't doing anything. Just sitting. Which was so unusual for him that it stopped her in the doorway. He looked up. He said, "I have to tell you something." She sat down across from him. He wrapped both hands around the mug. He looked at the table. He had the posture of a man who's been rehearsing something and has just decided the rehearsal is over. 12 years ago, he said, "I was in a rough patch. That's the short version." He paused. "The longer version is that I'd been drinking for about 4 years and I'd lost most of what mattered and I was down to the truck and whatever I could fit in it." Anna waited. "I came up here," he said. "To the lodge. Needed a place to sleep. Needed a lot of things." He turned the mug in his hands. Joseph opened the door. "I was not in good shape. I said some things, broke a lamp, I think. Don't fully remember." A pause. "He told me to go sleep it off in the truck and come back when I could act right." Anna thought about the ledger entry. 12 years ago. Earl wasn't supposed to tell it, but it was sitting right there in the ledger, and now Ray was telling her himself. And she understood they were talking about the same night from different sides. "I slept in the truck," Ray said. "I drove off in the morning. I told myself I wasn't coming back. I was embarrassed and angry, and that combination will keep you stupid longer than almost anything else. But you came back," she said, 2 days later. He nodded. "I don't know why. I just drove back up. And Joseph came out and handed me a cup of coffee and said, 'Come in and fix the circuit in room 6. I've been meaning to get to it.'" He stopped. "That was it?" Anna said. "That was it," Ray said. "Never mentioned the night before. Not once. Not that day. Not in the 12 years since." He looked at her finally. "He just handed me the coffee and pointed me at the work." She thought about that. The specific generosity of it. The way not mentioning something could be its own kind of forgiveness. Not erasure. Not pretending. Just choosing to lead with what came next instead of what had already happened. "He did that," she said softly. "Not a question. He did that," Ray said. "And I spent 12 years paying it back in electrical work and never once said thank you to his face because I didn't know how." He looked at the table again. "So I'm saying it to you instead. Because you're the one who's here," she said. "He knew you were saying it. He always knew." Ray picked up his coffee, drank. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." He didn't stay much longer after that. He had a job in town at 2. He rinsed his mug and put on his jacket and stopped at the door. "There's something in the basement," he said. Behind the storage shelves. I found it when I was down there last week, but I thought you should be the one to open it." She went downstairs after he left. The basement was where it had always been, which was obvious, but the feeling of it was different now than when she was a child. Smaller, more practical, the kind of space that's been used by someone with a system for a very long time. Shelves on 3 walls organized by type and function, spare parts, cleaning supplies, boxes of guest room linens, a workbench along the east wall with tools hung above it in the order you'd reach for them. She moved the 2 storage shelves that stood at the right angle to the east wall. Behind them was a door, low and narrow, older than the shelves. She would have missed it completely if she hadn't been looking. She had to duck to go through. The room on the other side was small, 8 feet by 10, maybe. Stone walls, which meant it was part of the original structure, older than the lodge itself, maybe a root cellar at some point. A bare bulb overhead on a pull cord. She pulled it, light. Shelves on 3 sides. On the shelves in neat flat stacks were papers, not ledgers, not guest records, architectural drawings. She stepped closer. The paper was old. The good drafting paper she'd used in school. The kind you didn't use after the mid-90s because everything moved to computer. Rolled and flat stacked. She picked up the top sheet and unrolled it. Her handwriting. On the title block in the lower right corner. Whitfield A. Spring Studio. Year 2. She stood very still. She knew this project. She hadn't thought about it in years, but she knew it immediately. The way you know the work of your own hands even a decade later. 2nd year of architecture school. Spring Studio. The project had been a rural community center, a building that served as gathering place and shelter and small-scale emergency housing all at once. Her professor had called it ambitious. She'd called it necessary. They'd argued about the structural system for 3 weeks. She'd never shown it to her father. She'd meant to. She'd thought about it. She'd decided it could wait until she had something more finished, more impressive, more worth his attention. She rolled that sheet back and pulled another. Same project, different elevation. The east facade, which she'd spent 2 weeks on getting the proportion of the windows right. Another sheet, the floor plan. Her pencil notations in the margins, the shorthand she used to remind herself what she was thinking. There were 14 sheets in total. The whole project. Every drawing. She sat down on the cold stone floor and held them in her lap and tried to understand how they were here. Her professor, Dr. Haynes. She'd liked him despite the arguing, or maybe because of it. He'd known her father, she hadn't known that then. But it made sense now. The mountain town circuit of people who knew each other in overlapping ways. Joseph must have asked him for copies. At some point. Sometime during or after her 2nd year. Without telling her. He'd asked for her drawings and kept them for 12 years without mentioning it. She was going to be furious about that. In a moment. Right after this other thing. She got up and went back through the low door, and through the basement, and up the stairs to the main hall. She walked through the hall slowly, looking the shelf in the corner to the left of the fireplace. She'd always liked that shelf, the proportions of it, the way it sat in the space. She'd thought it was her father's taste. Solid, practical, slightly better than it needed to be. It was her shelf. From the drawing. From page 7 of the Spring Studio project. He'd built it. He'd built her design and put it in his lodge and never said a word. She walked to the kitchen. The window above the sink. The angle of it. The way the light came in late afternoon and hit the east wall. She'd specified that window. Orientation, size, sill depth. On page 4, she went upstairs. Stood in the doorway of room 12. The layout of the room. The position of the wood stove. The placement of the window. All of it. He'd taken her drawings and built them into the lodge. Not all of it. Not the whole project, but pieces. The pieces he could use. The pieces that made sense in this space. She sat down on the edge of the bed in room 12 and put her face in her hands and stayed like that for a while. He'd never said. He'd never called her and said, "I used your drawings." He'd never invited her up to see. He'd just built her ideas into the place he loved most and kept the originals in a room in the basement where she would only find them if she came home. She didn't know if she was angry or devastated or something else entirely. Something that didn't have a simple name. The feeling of being known by someone who didn't know how to tell you they knew you. The feeling of being seen by someone who couldn't find the words for it. Her father. 12 years. Her drawings in a stone room under his lodge. She sat in room 12 for a long time. Then she heard a car outside and she got up. She expected Ray coming back for something. Or Sylvie. Or the Kessler brothers, with the part for the boiler they'd been discussing for 2 days. She did not expect the gray sedan with Denver plates. The man who got out in the expensive overcoat. Preston Cole. Not his assistant. Not his lawyer. Him. He walked up the porch steps like a man who'd decided something and wasn't going to talk himself out of it. She opened the door before he knocked. He stopped. She said, "Mr. Cole, Ms. Whitfield." He looked at her steadily. The pleasant face from before was still there. But something else was there too. Something more careful. "I apologize for coming without calling. What do you want?" He was quiet for a moment, like he was choosing between the version he'd planned to say and the one that was actually true. "My father tried to buy this property 15 years ago," he said. "Your father said no. He was direct about it." "Sounds right," Anna said. "My father took it personally." Cole looked at the lodge over her shoulder. He shouldn't have. It was a business decision, and Joseph Whitfield had every right to make it. But he did take it personally, and it became a thing between them. He paused. "When I came into the business, this property was on the list. Not because of the numbers, because of my father." She looked at him. "I used Garrett," he said. "I knew about the situation with your marriage. I thought it was leverage." He said it plainly, without the pleasant packaging from before. "That was wrong." "Yes," she said. "It was. The offer stands," he said. "But without the timeline and without conditions on how you decide." He held out an envelope. "That's a revised agreement. No 72 hours. No pressure from me or anyone connected to me. If you ever want to sell, the number's in there." She took the envelope. She didn't open it. He said, "Your father turned my father down because he said this property wasn't a transaction. He said it was a responsibility." He looked at her. "I didn't understand that when I came up here the first time. I think I understand it better now." He went back down the porch steps. She watched him get in the car and back down the drive. Then she looked at the envelope. She carried it inside. Set it on the front desk. She'd look at it eventually. Maybe. Or she'd put it in the same drawer as the business card pieces and let it sit until she knew what she wanted. She went to the library. She found the document Earl had mentioned, the trust paperwork her father had prepared, in a separate folder tucked behind the ledgers on the middle shelf. She hadn't looked at it before because the crisis had passed when Cole backed down and she hadn't needed it. She looked at it now. Joseph had prepared it 4 years ago. A conservation and community use trust. If properly filed, it would designate the lodge and its land for ongoing use as a community gathering space. It would make a sale for private development significantly more complicated legally. It had been drafted by a lawyer in Durango whose name she recognized, a woman her father had mentioned once or twice over the years. He'd had it ready for 4 years, just in case. She sat with the document and thought about that. 4 years of keeping this in a drawer. 4 years of knowing what he wanted for this place. And never saying anything about it to Anna. Never explaining the plan. Because he didn't know if she'd want to be part of it. Because he was Joseph Whitfield, and he didn't know how to ask. The thing she needed to do became clear in the way important things sometimes did. Not dramatically. Not with a rush of feeling. Just a quiet, certain click. She called the lawyer in Durango. Her name was Helen Marsh, and she picked up on the second ring and said she'd been wondering when Anna would call. "You knew about this?" Anna said. "Joseph told me to expect you," Helen said. "He just didn't say when." Apparently no one in her father's orbit had been told when. Just that she was coming. She spent an hour on the phone with Helen Marsh going through the trust document. Some of it needed updating. The specific terms around community use needed to be clearer. There were things to fix. But the structure was sound. Very sound. Her father had not been a lawyer, but he had been a man who paid attention to the right things and trusted the right people and had put this together carefully. The bones were good. She filed the trust application from the phone, with Helen walking her through each step, and when it was done she sat at the front desk in the main hall with the phone in her lap and felt something settle. Not triumph. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than either. The feeling of something going where it was always supposed to go. She picked up the ledger. She'd been avoiding the last section. Not consciously. Just finding other things to do when she got close to it. But now she turned to the last pages. The writing here was different, slower, more careful. The hand of a man who knew he wasn't going to be able to come back and finish things. He wrote about the lodge, about the things that needed doing, about Earl and Ray and Sylvie and what each of them knew and what each of them might be willing to do. He wrote about Anna. I should have told her more things. That she was right about the kitchen window. That I used her drawings. That the first time I saw her stand up to a contractor on a job site I was so proud I almost embarrassed myself. That I know she's going to be a better parent than she thinks she is. That she gets her stubbornness from me, and I'm sorry for that but also not sorry. He wrote, she's going to be angry when she finds out about the drawings. Good. She should be. But I hope she understands what I was trying to say with it. That I was paying attention. That I always was. Even when I was bad at showing it. Then, below a space, his last entry in the ledger. Dated 2 weeks before he died. There is one more thing, bottom of the box. I wrote it for someone I don't know and can't find, if Anna can find her. If the right moment comes. I trust Anna to know when. She closed the ledger. She went to the library and got the box. She sat down on the library floor with it. She opened it. She took out the small envelope from the bottom. For the one coming with you. She turned it over. She was going to open it. She had been going to open it since she found it. She'd just been waiting. The way her father said wait for the right moment without knowing what the right moment was or when it would arrive. She slid her finger under the flap. The letter inside was 1 page. Her father's handwriting. Slow and deliberate. To the one coming with Anna. I don't know your name. I don't know if you're a girl or a boy. I don't know when you'll read this or if Anna will read it first and tell you about it when you're older. That seems like something she'd do. I'm Joseph. I'm your grandfather. I've never been very good at saying the important things at the right time, which is something we're going to need to talk about at some point. But I'm trying to do better. I want you to know something. You are coming into a family that is stubborn and quiet and sometimes gets the order of things wrong. We love hard and say it badly and need more time than most people to get to what we mean. But we get there. This lodge has been in this family since 1961. It started as a place for guests and became something else over time. A door that stays open. A room where people can land when they need somewhere to land. That's your inheritance. Not the building. The idea inside it. I hope I get to teach you to build a fire. If I don't, your mother knows how. She learned it here, on this floor beside this fireplace, when she was young enough that she thought her father knew everything. He didn't, but he loved her. And I love you already. Sight unseen. Before you've done a single thing to earn it. That's how it works in this family. Yours, Joseph. Anna sat on the floor of the library with the letter in her hands and cried. Not quietly. Not the controlled crying of someone managing their emotions. The kind of crying that doesn't care who hears it because it's been held in too long and it needs out. She cried for the letter. For the time she couldn't get back. For the phone call she didn't return. For 18 months of a truth her father had carried alone because he was scared of doing the wrong thing and ended up doing the wrong thing anyway, the way scared people usually do. She cried. Because she understood him completely and she missed him with a fierceness that surprised her even now. And then the crying ran out, the way it always eventually does, and she sat in the quiet library with her father's letter in her hands, and the mountain outside the window, and the faint sound of Earl's hammer from somewhere, and the smell of cedar and old wood and winter. She read the letter again. She folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope. She held the envelope against her chest for a moment. Then she stood up. She went to the kitchen and washed her face and made coffee and stood at the window and watched the light change on the mountain. Late afternoon. The sky clearing at the edges. Earl came in from outside, stamped his boots. He looked at her face. He didn't say anything about it. She handed him a cup of coffee. He took it and sat down at the table. She sat across from him with her own cup. She said, "He used my drawings, from school. He built pieces of my school project into the lodge." Earl nodded slowly. "The shelf," he said. "You knew. I helped him build it," Earl said. "He had your drawings rolled out on the workbench. He was very particular about getting it right." She shook her head. She was going to be angry about this for a while. It would take a while to become something else. "He was proud of you," Earl said. "He didn't know how to say it to your face. So he said it in pine and nails." She drank her coffee. Outside the window, the mountain was going gold at the top where the afternoon sun was hitting the snow. Lower down it was still white, still cold, still the same mountain it had always been. She thought about the trust document, now in process. She thought about the list on her legal pad, the things that needed doing, in order. She thought about the small envelope and the letter that had been waiting in the bottom of a wooden box for someone who hadn't been born yet. She thought about her father, a man who got the order of things wrong and loved hard and said it badly and got there eventually. She was his daughter. She was going to get there. The fire needed another log. She got up and put one on, watched it catch. A fire doesn't need much to start. She knew. He'd taught her. January came in hard. The kind of cold that had opinions, that got into the walls at night and made the old building talk in its sleep. Pipes ticking. Beams settling. The wood stove in room 12 working harder than it should have, which Ray had opinions about and was going to fix in the spring once the part came in from Denver. Anna knew the sounds now. All of them. She'd learned them the way you learn the sounds of any place you've decided to stay in. Not because someone taught her, because she listened. She was good at listening. She'd gotten better at it. The trust had gone through in late November. Helen Marsh called on a Tuesday morning and read Anna the confirmation language in the careful way of a lawyer who wants to make sure you understand exactly what you have. What it meant was that Whitfield Ridge Lodge was protected. Not perfectly. Nothing was forever. But substantially, legally, in ways that would make Preston Cole's interest a complicated and expensive proposition rather than a simple one. She'd told Earl first. He nodded and said good, and went back to what he was doing, which was the right response. She told Sylvie second. Sylvie said wonderful and asked if Anna wanted pie. Also the right response. The lodge had been open since April. Not fully. Anna had been deliberate about that. She wasn't ready for fully open and the building wasn't either. 4 of the 8 guest rooms were available. Quietly. By word of mouth through Sylvie's contacts in town and the Kessler Brothers network and the general mountain town knowledge transfer that happens when people who know things talk to people who need them. Guests came. Not many. Enough. Couples who wanted quiet. A writer who needed 2 weeks and a view. A retired school teacher who came for a long weekend and stayed 10 days and helped Anna repaint the trim on the east wing in exchange for a reduced rate, which Anna hadn't asked for but accepted because the trim needed painting and 2 pairs of hands were better than 1. Room 12 was not on the available list. Room 12 was never on the available list. Room 12 had its own system, which Anna kept in a separate notebook and which had no formal criteria she could have written down. You knew when someone needed it. You just knew. 3 people since April. A man who'd driven up the mountain with car trouble, and nowhere to be by morning and a quality of exhaustion that went past tired. A woman in her late 50s, well-dressed, who'd stood at the front desk with a very controlled expression that was doing a lot of work. And one other, in October, a middle-aged man with a truck full of his own belongings and a story he didn't offer and she didn't ask for. He'd stayed 9 days. When he left, he'd fixed the second burner in the kitchen, the one that had been in dispute between Ray and the Kessler brothers for 11 months, and left a note on the counter. Thank you. I know what I'm doing next. She kept the note in the box, with the letters and the photographs and the small white envelope she'd read on the library floor. The baby came on January 9th, 3 in the morning. An inconvenient hour. Anna said so, and Earl, who was awake in the kitchen when she came downstairs with a specific expression on her face, said tell her that when she's older. Sylvie was there in 20 minutes. Ray arrived 8 minutes after that, truck already running. He'd been 30 years in this valley. Knew every road in any weather. He drove down the mountain in the January dark with the focused competence of a man who understood exactly what this moment required. Anna was in the back seat telling herself to breathe, which she was doing, mostly. Sylvie sat beside her and said she was doing fine, which she was doing, mostly. Earl followed in his own truck. The hospital was 40 minutes down. They made it in 31. Anna didn't ask how. Ray didn't explain. She was born at 5:47 in the morning, 3 weeks early. 6 pounds, 4 ounces. The doctor said Early was fine, that she was fine, that everything was fine, and Anna believed them because she was holding the evidence. Loud from the first second, red-faced and furious about the whole situation, which Anna completely understood because she was also somewhat furious about the hour. They put her in Anna's arms. Anna looked at her, forgot every word she'd ever known for about 30 seconds, then came back. She looked at this person. This entirely new and specific person who had her grandfather's nose. Already, that same angle at the bridge that Joseph Whitfield had carried his whole life, and apparently intended to pass down without asking anyone's permission. Anna said hello. I've been wondering about you. The baby opened her eyes, dark, unfocused, already looking for something. Anna held her tighter. She named her June. Not for a reason anyone outside her own head would understand. June was the month she'd found out. The month she'd sat with a test in the bathroom of the Denver house and understood her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet see. The month before everything fell apart. The month before she found out it was going to be all right anyway. June Whitfield. Not anything else. Joseph's granddaughter. Anna's daughter. Earl went to the hallway for 4 minutes. Came back with reddened eyes and a composed expression, and no acknowledgement of the 4 minutes. Anna did not mention it. Sylvie held June for exactly 11 minutes, counting quietly. Then handed her back and said she was perfect and that her ears were very good ears. Ray stood at the foot of the bed with his hat in both hands, exactly the way he'd stood at the funeral a year and 2 months ago. He looked at June with an expression Anna needed a moment to name. Relief. That was it. The specific relief of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just seen evidence that the carrying was worth it. She understood that feeling. She brought June home to the lodge on January 12th, snowing again. January was committed to this and not negotiating. Anna carried her up the porch steps and through the front door and stood in the main hall with her daughter and looked at the fireplace and the shelf in the corner and Gerald above the mantel, who had been looking down at this hall since 1961 and had seen a great many things and would not be impressed or unimpressed by one more. She went upstairs. She stood in the doorway of room 12. She'd thought about this, whether it was the right room for the first nights. Then she'd thought about what room 12 was for, what it had always been for. People who needed somewhere safe to land while they figured out what came next. She carried June in and laid her down in the old wooden crib that Ray and Earl had assembled in November, arguing about the instructions for an hour before admitting the instructions were in fact necessary. She tucked the quilt around her. One of the 3 that had been in room 12's closet since before Anna could remember. She'd washed it, mended the torn corner, and put it back where it belonged. June slept. Anna sat in the rocking chair. Earl had moved in from the hall and watched her daughter sleep in the mercy room. Winter held. They developed rhythms. Anna and June and the lodge and everyone who moved through it. Earl was there most days, always with something to fix or build or check, moving through the building like a man who had decided it was his job to keep it standing and did not require anyone to assign him this task formally. Sylvie came Tuesday and Thursday mornings, brought food, took inventory, argued with Anna about the guest breakfast menu, with the conviction of a woman who had been feeding people for 15 years and knew things. Ray was different. That was the word for it. Different from how he'd been in those first weeks, when he'd shown up with his toolbox and his careful distance and his 1 foot out the door energy. Something had shifted after the conversation in the kitchen. After he'd said what he'd needed to say about Joseph and the night 12 years ago, and the coffee handed over without ceremony. Like the saying of it had put something down. Like he'd been carrying it in one hand for so long he'd forgotten the hand was full. The first sign was small. One morning in February he knocked on the front door instead of walking in. Anna opened it and looked at him. He said he wanted to check the breaker panel if that was all right with her. Not a statement this time. As she said yes, he nodded and came in and went upstairs, and she stood in the hall for a moment after he'd gone up, understanding that something had changed without either of them saying so. After that he came on Thursdays, around 4, when the light on the mountain went gold through the west windows. He'd have coffee. He'd find something that needed doing, always something, because old buildings never ran out of things that needed doing. And he'd hold June with the studied casualness of a man pretending this wasn't something he planned for. Anna noticed. She didn't say anything about it. Some things didn't need naming to be real. June grew, the way babies grow, with complete indifference to everyone's sense of time. Anna had been warned by Sylvie and the pediatrician in town and the retired school teacher who'd helped with the trim painting and who had 4 grown children and strong opinions on all of it. The first months go fast, they said. Fast and slow. Both at once. Every day the same lodge, the same mountain, the same cold. And every week June different in some small way that Anna registered in her chest before she registered it anywhere else. She was rolling over by March, interested in the fireplace light. Uninterested in sleeping at reasonable hours. which was a trait Anna recognized and was not going to claim credit for out loud. April came. The snow started thinking about leaving. The back deck, fully replaced in October, handled the freeze-thaw cycle without complaint. The roof held through everything winter sent, which Earl had predicted, and which Anna had chosen to believe because the alternative was too expensive to contemplate. The kitchen's second burner worked. Had been working since the October man fixed it. The breaker panel on the second floor had been updated by Ray in February, quietly, over 2 days, and he'd handed her the invoice and she'd paid it, and that was the transaction. Clean and simple, the way he preferred things. The lodge opened properly in April. 8 rooms. Breakfast included. Room 12 off the list as always. The first morning fully open, Anna stood behind the front desk in the main hall. Clean. Warm. The shelf in the corner that her father had built from her drawings. The one she'd spent some weeks being angry about, and more weeks being something else about. She'd hung one of the original drawings on the wall beside the library door. Framed it herself. The east elevation, the one she'd spent 2 weeks on in her second year. Just that one. She didn't explain it to anyone who asked. She just said her father built it, which was true enough. Guests came. Real guests now. More of them. Word had gotten to the right places through Sylvie's network and the Kessler brothers and a review on a hiking website that someone had left in March, calling the lodge quiet and genuine and the breakfast better than expected. Anna had read that review 3 times. Not because of the compliment. Because of the word genuine. She thought her father would have liked that word. The Holloways from the valley brought their daughter and son-in-law for a long weekend in May. The retired schoolteacher came back, this time with her sister. A couple from Colorado Springs drove up on a Tuesday in June with no reservation, and Anna had a room available, and they stayed 4 nights and left a card at the desk that said they'd be back. She was building something. She could feel it the way you feel the structure of a building, when you're inside it. Not from looking at it from the outside, from the inside. From the way rooms connected and light moved and people moved through space. She knew that feeling. She'd spent 12 years learning to trust it. Summer on the mountain was different from winter. The color of it, for one thing. The snow gone, the mountain showed itself in green and gray, and the dark brown of old rock and the bright particular yellow of wildflowers along the road in July. The creek behind the lodge ran fast in June from snowmelt and slowed through August to something more considered. Anna took June out to it on warm afternoons, sat on the bank while June looked at the water with the focused attention she brought to everything, trying to understand it, taking her time. Sylvie came out one afternoon in August and found them there. She sat down on the bank without being asked, and they sat together and watched the water for a while, not talking, just there. Sylvie said eventually, "He used to sit here." Anna didn't ask who. End of the day when the guests were settled, he'd come out here, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes longer. Sylvie picked up a small flat stone, turned it in her fingers. He never said why. I only found out because I came out to ask him something once, and he was just sitting. Anna looked at the water. He didn't look sad, Sylvie said. He just looked like a man who needed a few minutes outside himself. She set the stone down. I think this place was that for him. All of it. The work of it. The keeping of it. She paused. Not an escape. More like a place to put things down for a minute. Anna understood that. She understood it more than she would have a year ago. Before she'd driven up the mountain in the snow with nowhere to go. Before she'd found Earl in room 12, and the firewood stacked and the note in her father's hand. Before the ledger and the letters and the drawings and the small white envelope that had been waiting in the bottom of a wooden box for someone not yet born. She understood her father better than she ever had when he was alive. That was the thing she'd had to make her peace with. The understanding came too late for him to know she had it. But it had come, and she was going to do something with it. September, October. The mountain going red and gold the way it did every year, indifferent to how beautiful it was. Just doing the thing seasons did. More guests. The writing couple from Denver who'd heard through a friend of the teacher. A pair of retired nurses from Pueblo who hiked every day and came back in the evenings with the satisfied exhaustion of women who had found the thing they needed. A man alone, early 60s, who sat in the main hall most evenings reading and nodded at Anna when she passed and asked for nothing else, which she respected. Room 12 3 more times. A woman who needed 2 weeks and got them. A man who needed 1 night and took 4. A young woman in September who showed up without luggage and left after 3 days and sent a card 2 weeks later. The card had no return address. It said, "I didn't know what I was going to do, now I do. Thank you." Anna put the card in the box. The box was getting full. She was going to need a bigger box. She thought her father would find that funny. She thought he'd find most of it funny, actually, in the way he found things funny, which was quietly and without announcing it. She thought about him differently now, not with the specific grief of the first year, which had a shape and a weight she knew well by then. Something more settled. The way you think about someone when you've accepted that they're gone, but haven't accepted that they're finished. Like he was still around in the ways he'd chosen to be. The firewood and the note and the box and Earl in room 12 and the shelf in the corner and the east elevation on the wall. He'd chosen those. Every one of them. He'd prepared what he could and left the rest to her. And the rest, it turned out, was considerable. November. The mountain went brown and spare, and then the first snow came in the 3rd week, and the lodge settled into its winter self again. Thicker blankets. The wood stove in room 12 working properly now. Ray had seen to that in September. Soup on the stove more often. The particular quality of early dark that made the lamp in the front window important in a way it wasn't in summer. Anna kept the lamp on every night. Had since the first night she'd arrived, wood December. 1 year, she didn't mark it formally. There was no ceremony for it. She just woke up on the morning of the day and lay in her room for a few minutes and thought, 1 year ago I was in a parking lot at a gas station trying to figure out who I could call. Then she got up and went to start breakfast. Earl was already in the kitchen with the coffee going. He looked at her when she came in and looked away. He knew what day it was. He didn't say anything about it. She was grateful for that. The day was ordinary, which was, she had come to understand the point. Guests to feed, rooms to see to. A leaking faucet in room 3 that Earl addressed mid-morning with the focused displeasure of a man who had fixed this particular faucet before and was going to fix it in a way that meant he didn't have to fix it again. June, who was nearly a year old now, and had opinions about everything, and expressed them loudly and without apology, pulling herself up on the furniture in the main hall, and looking at Gerald, with the serious assessment of someone deciding whether to be impressed. Sylvie came by at noon, brought a casserole and stayed for an hour and talked about the diner, and a situation with the town council and a new coffee supplier she was considering. And Anna listened to all of it, because Sylvie's ordinary news was one of the things that made life feel continuous. Like the days were connected, like there was a fabric to this. Ray came at 4, of course. He fixed the hinge on the mudroom door, which had been sticking since October, and drank his coffee and held June for 22 minutes. Anna counted this time because she was curious, and then he said he'd be back Thursday and left, after dinner, after June was asleep. After Earl went back to his room and the lodge quieted into its nighttime self. Anna sat in the main hall, the fire going, the lamp on by the entrance, the logbook stacked on the front desk where she'd been adding her own entry, slowly, one by one, the way her father had for 30 years. Not trying to match his handwriting, just trying to match his honesty. What happened, what it meant. The small, imprecise record of a place that stayed open. She was reading through one of the older logbooks, not looking for anything specific, just reading. The knock came at 8:47. 3 knocks, not hard, not tentative. The knock of someone who has decided to be here. Anna set down the logbook. She went to the door. The woman on the porch was around 55, medium height. A good coat, the right weight for Denver, not quite enough for a December mountain. Hair light brown going silver, cut sensibly. She had a single bag, the kind you pack when you're leaving quickly or didn't plan to leave at all. Her eyes were red. Not from cold, she said. I'm sorry, I saw the sign on the highway. I've passed it before. She paused. I don't know why I stopped tonight. Anna looked at her, she knew this. The way you know it, the not know why I stopped, which was always a knowing underneath. The sign on the highway that you've passed 100 times, and one night your hands turned the wheel before your mind caught up. Come in, Anna said. The woman came in. She stood in the main hall and looked around at the fireplace, and the shelf and the lamp and the warmth that had been built into this building all winter, worked into the walls the way warmth gets into old buildings when someone keeps the fire going long enough. Anna went to the desk. We have a room available, she said. Do you need one night or a few? The woman looked at her hands. I'm not sure. That's all right, Anna said. We don't have to decide tonight. The woman looked up. Something in her face shifted, not relief yet. The thing that comes before relief. When you've been holding everything so long you've forgotten it has weight. When someone says, you don't have to decide and you understand they mean it. Anna slid the registration book across the desk. Just your name, she said. That's all. The woman picked up the pen. She wrote slowly. Careful cursive. The handwriting of someone who was taught to do it right. Meg Dobbins. Anna's hand was resting on the edge of the desk. She did not move it. She read the name once. Then her eyes came up to the woman's face. 55, she'd thought when she opened the door. Red eyes. A bag packed fast or not planned at all. A coat for a different altitude. Meg. The name in her father's ledger. One name, no last name, written in March of 2 years ago in Joseph's careful hand beside the name of a restaurant in Denver. Saw something I wish I hadn't. A name. A date. The start of 18 months of silence. Anna stood behind the front desk and looked at Meg Dobbins. Meg didn't know who Anna was, that much was clear. She was looking at the registration book with the slightly unfocused look of someone running on empty, filling in a form, because the form is there, and it's the next small thing, and small things were what you did when the big ones had stopped making sense. Anna thought about Beverly's door, the specific sound of it closing, the cold porch, 2 suitcases she'd loaded herself because no one offered. She thought about driving 2 hours in the snow before she let herself cry, the gas station parking lot, the key in her pocket that turned out to be a door. She thought about Earl in room 12 with the fire already lit, not because she'd earned it, not because she'd asked for it, because her father had said keep it ready, and Earl had kept it ready. She thought about what room 12 was for, not for people who deserved it, not for people who had the right reasons or the right story, or a clean record of good decisions, for people who had run out of road, for people who needed one night that wasn't asking anything of them, for people standing on a porch in a coat that wasn't warm enough with nowhere else to go. That was all. That was the whole thing. Anna reached into the drawer. She took out the key, the old brass key with the number worn down from handling. Number 12. She'd had copies made, 3 of them, because some things you didn't want to have only one of. But she always kept the original here, in this drawer, because it was her father's, and because it had a weight to it that the copies didn't have. She set it on the desk between them. Meg looked at it. Room 12, Anna said. End of the upstairs hall, turn right at the top of the stairs. Extra blankets in the closet. Towels on the shelf. She paused. The wood stove is the best heat in the building. The long matches in the blue tin on the mantel light easier than the short ones. Meg looked at the key and then at Anna. How much, she said. Tonight's taken care of, Anna said, the way her father would have said it. She was sure of that. She had never heard him say it, but she was sure. Meg's jaw moved slightly. You don't have to, I know, Anna said. I want to. Meg picked up the key. She held it a moment, looking at it the way people looked at small things that were doing more than they were supposed to do. An old brass key on a worn tag with a number that meant something Anna hadn't known a year ago and now knew completely. Thank you, Meg said quietly. Breakfast is at 7, Anna said. Or I can bring something up if you'd rather not come down. Either way is fine. Meg nodded. She picked up her bag. She walked to the staircase, her hand on the railing going up. Right turn at the top, the way Anna had said. The hall. The door of room 12 opening. A pause. Then it closed. Anna stood at the front desk and listened to the silence after the door closed, the lodge settling into itself around her. Earl's radio low from somewhere in the back. The fire in the main hall. The lamp doing what it was supposed to do. She stood there for a moment. Not thinking. Not working anything out. Just standing. There was a feeling she didn't have a clean name for. Not satisfaction, which was too small. Not peace, which implied something finished. More like alignment. The sensation of being in the right place doing the right thing. It didn't happen often enough to take for granted, but it happened often enough now that she recognized it when it came. Her father had felt this. She knew that now. Not from anything he'd said out loud. From the ledger. From the entries that ran on longer than necessary, that circled back to the same rooms and the same doors and the same moments of a person arriving and a door being opened. He'd written about it the way he wrote about everything important, which was sideways, which was by describing the thing next to it rather than the thing itself. But she could read it now. She'd learned his language. She closed the registration book. She went to the fireplace and put another log on. Not the last one. just enough to keep it going through the night. She checked the lamp by the entrance, which was fine, which was always fine, which she checked anyway because some habits were worth keeping. She turned off the overhead in the main hall, left the side lamp on, left the lamp by the entrance on. The 2 points of light that meant occupied, meant open, meant someone was here and the door was not locked. She went to the base of the staircase. She stood there a moment and listened. The lodge at night, its particular vocabulary, the beams, the pipes, the wood stove in room 12 doing its work. She could hear it from here, the low, steady sound of a fire that had caught and settled. Good. She went upstairs. She paused at June's door, listened, quiet. She opened it an inch and looked in, June asleep on her back with both arms out like she was waiting for something to land in them. The nightlight on. The quilt pulled up. Anna stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking. The specific thing that parents did. She understood now. The checking that wasn't really checking. The looking that was mostly just wanting to see. She pulled the door almost closed. She went to her own room. She didn't turn on the light right away. Stood at the window instead. The mountain at night. Black and silver and enormous. The way it was every night. The way it would be whether she was here or not. Snow on the upper ridges. Stars above that, more than you could count. More than you could see from anywhere with lights nearby. This far up. This far from everything, the sky had depth to it. Like you were looking into something, not just up at something. She thought about her father sitting by the creek, putting things down for a minute. She thought about the ledger. The last entry in his particular hand, the slower writing of a man at the end of something, and the words, "I trust Anna to know when." She had known. When the moment came, she had known. Not because she was wise or because she'd figured out the right answer. Because she'd been the woman on the other side of a closed door, and she understood what it cost and what it meant and what it was worth. That was what he'd left her. Not just the building and the room and the key. The knowledge of what it felt like to need the door open. And the choice, when the moment came, of what to do about it. She looked at the mountain. Then she turned from the window and got into bed. Outside, Whitfield Ridge Lodge stood on the mountain the way it had stood since 1961. The lamp by the entrance making its steady circle of light. Room 12 warm at the end of the upper hall. The sign on the highway below, seen or not seen by whoever was passing. Waiting with the patience of a thing that did not need to be noticed every time to be doing its work. Just there. Just open. Just a light left on. Which was enough. Which had always been enough.